Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the music rating, ranking, and reviewing podcast, what you call Music Meltdown, in which we discuss any artist's discography, songs, musical topics, really whatever comes to mind. This episode, we are talking about one of the biggest pop stars of all time, maybe even the biggest one if you're excluding groups like the Beatles and such. Of course, talking about the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson is somebody that I've always had like a faint interest in. I want to address this right off the top of things. Stuff that he's accused of, what he probably did, I'm not going to bring it up. It's just going to dampen the whole experience. And for as good as his discography is, I don't want that to like sully this whole discussion. However, he has, I believe, 9 studio records to his name. I'm not including any of the posthumous stuff. It just doesn't seem appropriate to me. That being said, he has 4 records he made whenever he was pretty much a kid, and then you have the classic period. Your Off the Walls, your Thrillers, your Bads, your Dangerouses, and then he has sort of those later 2 records that, well, despite selling incredibly well, just nobody ever talks about it anymore. So I was really interested to tackle Michael Jackson because he's got a very fascinating catalog. He was the king of pop music and was always adapting to other styles of pop, and he was consistently popular throughout that time. And I'd argue if he even put out more records after Invincible, he probably would be just massive still. But even then, let's get into it. All of his records, don't think that there's anything really to bring up. The only real point of contention is for history. I only counted the second half studio side, didn't count basically the greatest hits, so that's sort of the only thing that I really need to point out there. That being said, however, let's get right into this with my least favorite Michael Jackson record being the aforementioned History album. This isn't anything awful, but it is a notable step down from Dangerous, in my opinion. He's getting a bit more anonymous with his sound, and while the songs are generally decent, unlike most other records, Michael fails to really elevate the material here. Like or hate his voice, Michael Jackson is an absolute powerhouse vocally, and he really does showcase it across all of these records. He has such charisma and power to him in a way that a lot of other pop stars simply don't have, and it makes sense why he was able to be as huge as he was for so long. Despite that, on the history record, there are a couple of solid tracks here. It's just not worth the length. This thing is nearly 75 minutes long, and it does not justify it. Scream, Sister in Moscow, and the title track were really the only highlights for me. On the whole, though, I don't think that Michael Jackson ever put out a truly bad record. Hell, I think that pretty much every album he put out is at least decent. I'm at 3 stars for history. It's a fairly solid record. And going up from there, we're going to the other half of his catalog with one of his child records. It's going to be Music and Me. This one's a bit of a letdown after the first 2. Michael's aging a bit and has a slightly deeper register across this record, which doesn't allow him to show off his sort of like innocence and childlike bliss, if you will, on his earlier albums. As well, the set of songs he's been given just really aren't as engaging as his prior releases, with only really Johnny Raven being the major standout. One thing I will say about all of the early Jackson records is the musicality on them are all incredibly strong. It's clear that they assembled a very talented group of musicians to back him, and he is able to sell most of the material. It just so happens that I don't quite prefer listening to a child made music, so it is what it is. Musically, it's solid, but this album, in comparison to the other Kid records, are rarely engaging. It's a decent release. Overall, though, just 3 stars. All right, following here, I'm going with his final release within his lifetime, being the album Invincible. This was Michael's final release of his life, and it shows him faltering to some of the less flattering production styles of the time. The early aughts pop sound just simply has not aged very gracefully. And while this record is as bloated as history was, the upside is that this one has much better songs consistently, I would say. Notably on more of the slower numbers, as his voice is still utter aces on here. Break of Dawn, Heaven Can Wait, Butterflies, and Speechless are all great, along with a few others are all late career highlights for him. The downside is that's only about a third of the record, while the rest is just simply not as good. Overall, it's still solid. It's a 3-star album, and with some trimming, it could have been really strong. Like, I could definitely see a 3.5, maybe even a 4-star album in here. It's just too long for what it is. Going up from here, I have his debut release, Got to Be There. This is really surprisingly good, despite how young he was. I'm already at 3.5 stars. For the most part, Michael Jackson did put out legitimately good albums, so that's really cool. Going from here, this feels the most immediate to remark is just how great the playing is. Everybody on the record is at full force. Songs are funky, they're soulful, they got tons of groove to them. It's honestly kind of excellent, even a bit sensual, which makes the child version of Michael Jackson be very weird. Some of these songs sound like they could be legitimately in like a softcore porn film or something. And you just have this child Michael Jackson singing over them. It's a bit strange, but I do think that it works. There's some very strong songs here, though. My favorites of which being You've Got a Friend, Love Is Here, Now You Aren't, Wings of My Love, and Ain't No Sunshine. It's a good soul record that you could tell whenever he gets older and is able to more properly convey the material. He really did have star power even from such a young age. Going up from here, I have the record Ben. Most of my review from Got to Be Here, generally speaking, applies to this album. I just happen to think the songs are slightly better here. Ben is great. Same with People Makes the World Go Round as well, in our own small way, is really good. He's just being given pretty good songs with, I believe the Motown machine was heavily supporting him at this time. I could be wrong. Nope, he was on Motown at this point, so Motown shit always sounds great, so it is what it is. Just a damn solid release. It's a 3.5 stars. And in contrast to like other younger artists, like the most direct point of comparison I would say is young Stevie Wonder. It just happens that Michael Jackson is a better stage performer than Stevie Wonder is, despite Stevie Wonder obviously being the bigger talent. MJ is just better for the performance side of things. Next up, this is going to be maybe a bit contentious that I have this one a bit lower. This is a part of his classic period, but it's the final one. It's going to be Dangerous. This is a bit of a weird album. It's Michael stab at New Jack's. Yeah, it's a bit of a weird record. This is Michael stab at New Jack Swing, a style that his sister Janet excelled at. Yeah, this is something that Michael honestly somewhat struggles with. The songs are solid and the production works. However, I don't really think that his voice hits home entirely with the New Jack Swing style that he's going for, and it takes a while to get going. Not really until Remember the Time do you hit a really solid track. And while there are good songs here, it's hard not to compare this one to Bad and to Thriller, because this was what directly followed Bad, one of the biggest records ever. So it's hard not to compare it. All in all, though, it is still pretty good for what it is. It just obviously falters with it being early 90s CD era, so it's going to be a bit long. Overall, though, it's still a fairly solid release. I have it at 3.5. It's still a good album. And going up from here, the final of his more sort of kid-centric records, I have the album Forever Michael. While still nothing outstanding, per the usual, the playing's great, the songwriting is strong. Above all else, Michael's voice is a lot closer to what he would sound like later on, and it's just great. He's able to suit the songs a lot better and elevate the arrangements more than they were before. We're Almost There, Take Me Back, Cinderella, Stay a While, and You Are There are all incredibly strong pop soul songs. You also get a little bit of the disco flair that was coming in off of that would later take massive precedent on Off the Wall. You get a little bit of it here, and while it's obviously not as great because you don't have Quincy Jones backing him, it's still really good here. Still at 3.5 stars. It's a solid record. The top three, it's the big three Michael records, and everybody kind of knows what number three is. It's really just ordering the top two. So at three, I got Bad. While this is a step down from Thriller, it's still a really fun pop album. We are 80s to the max, and Michael is at the most exuberant he'd ever be, and the songs are all great because of it. The title track, The Way You Make Me Feel, Man in the Mirror, and Smooth Criminal are all classics. I think Dirty Diana is almost the closest he would ever come to sounding a bit like Prince. It has a bit more of a rocking flair to it that really grew on me this time. The only thing holding this record back is the fact that it is missing one fantastic song, such as the bonus track, Leave Me Alone, which is one of my favorite songs of his and probably would get the record to 4.5 stars. But as it stands with the standard release of the record, it is a 4-star album, very good album with Bad. The top two, it's really tight. I think it really does just boil down to whether or not you prefer the 70s or the 80s. Because Off the Wall has a very more 70s like disco sound with a bit of pop soul into it, whereas Thriller is really the epitome of what 80s pop would be. For me, I'm always going to go 70s over 80s. So at number two, I have Thriller, an album I've somewhat put down in the past, but I'm officially on board with the greatness of it. I'm at 4.5 stars. The production is great, songs are tight. Um, There's a reason pretty much all of them are on the radio at this point. Want to be starting something as a killer opener? The Girl Is Mine, I think, is lovely. It's like a perfect level of cheese, and I think that McCartney fits him brilliantly. Thriller is excellent. Beat It and Billie Jean are lovely pop songs. And while I have grown tired of them, the highlights for me are the closing two tracks here. PYT, which I think is just sensational. Absolutely adore that song. I know it's icky to listen to now, given what Michael is probably rightfully accused of. It's just such a banger. It closes greatly with The Lady and My Wife. It's a landmark record for a reason. Aces to aces, just great stuff front to back. But my favorite Michael Jackson record, it's always been the case, is going to be his 1979 opus, Off the Wall. This is such a massive leap in quality from the records before, which I did think were good. But this might be one of the greatest pop albums of all time. Michael's voice is fully formed. He commands the songs like nobody else would in pop music and uses his voice as the primary lead instrument here. But that's not even accounting for the biggest pro of this album, which is Quincy Jones coming into it. He is a fantastic producer who creates pretty much essentially a perfect disco album here. Michael is also starting to write a bit more of the songs, and for what they are, they're just great. When you have tracks like Gotta Be Starting Something and Get on the Floor on here, those are the best of his tracks. But on the whole, this album is just a disco banger after banger. It's 4.5 stars. I think it's a fantastic album. Really just lovely stuff. And all in all, I just don't think that there's much bad I can really say about Michael Jackson, aside from personally. But the songs are just so good. Whenever he's at his peak, his pop writing is just outstanding. The songs that people write for him were great, and he commands a stage like nobody else. There's a reason why he became perhaps the biggest pop star of all time. It's pretty great, and there's nothing more to say about it. It's Michael fucking Jackson. He's great. That being said, though, I hope that you enjoyed this, and y'all have a great one.